doing this. Okay? It's not just him. It's not just him. It's not just him. Not true weather forecasters also. I mean, at a certain point, you have to understand that like weather forecasting is limited by technology, and it's still way more on the money than Jim Cramer. Are you kidding me? Weather forecasters, if they were going around saying like there is not going to be a fucking tornado tomorrow, and then immediately there was a tornado and a fucking earthquake and wildfires happening immediately after you said there's certainly not going to be any of those things, then they would get fucking fired. Because that's what he does.
This morning, we witnessed the second largest bank failure in American history, which naturally created a wave of fear as the day went on. Hence, the Dow ultimately losing 345 points, S&P falling 1.45%, and the Nasdaq tumbling 1.76%.
Now, I have to admit, he has a way with sound effects. Now I understand why they call it Mad Money. But there is one thing Jim Cramer isn't wrong about, which I know is shocking. Fear is in the air, and many are worrying, is my bank safe? So today I thought we'd break it all down, the recent collapses, why the government has announced a special bailout, why some people are happy with it and others are mad, and of course, what's next. Let's start with the facts. 3 major banks in the United States have failed in a short period of time: Silvergate, Signature Bank, and Silicon Valley Bank. Now, Silvergate was the smallest with about $11 billion in assets. Signature was like the mid-sized one, and Silicon Valley Bank was the largest. Now, Silvergate and Signature Bank were well known in the crypto space, while Silicon Valley Bank was massive in the tech startup world. However, despite their differences, these banks failed for similar reasons at a high level, which is this: they all experienced a run on the banks when too many people demand too much money too fast, and the banks don't have cash on hand. Now, I want to make something clear. It would be easy to draw the comparison to the crypto crash in 2022 when several crypto companies like FTX collapsed, but there's an important difference. Companies like FTX were insolvent. When there was a run on their banks, they had no money to give. Whereas the banks we're talking about were illiquid, meaning they had the money, but when they had the bank run, some of it was locked up in long-term assets like bonds. Now, to be clear, these are not the same things at all. But things can get a little fuzzy in the details. For example, when a bank run happens, what can start as a liquidity problem can become an insolvency problem if the bank has to sell what they have for cash. And let me explain. One of the safest investments is considered to be treasury bonds. Your grandparents probably invest in it. Banks invest in them, both for the same reason. They provide a stable rate of return. So say you're Signature Bank, right? You've got billions of dollars in customer assets. Where do you put it? Well, into treasury bonds, which let's say earn you 1% a year. You keep some cash on hand for withdrawals, but you figure, look, if I need to sell these, I can sell my bonds, right? But what happens if interest rates rise really quickly? Well, suddenly you have this 5-year bond you bought a year ago, which gives you 1% a year. But now the government is selling the same 5-year bond and offering 5%. Because of that, now your bond's value on the open market drops. It's no longer even worth what you paid for it because it's giving less interest than other bonds. And so if you try to sell that, well, now you lose money. Now, to be clear, if you held the bond to maturity, well, you would still make that 1% and not lose anything. But when depositors are asking for cash, it's simply not an option to hold on. Now, I know that seems complicated, but the essence of it is this. Banks were forced to sell long-term assets that they didn't want to sell, like bonds, and they took losses because of these bank runs. Because of that, what started as a liquidity crisis became an insolvency crisis, and that's why they got shut down, because they weren't going to be able to service all those withdrawals.
Out of everything from monkeys and bananas to fucking a bunch of random influencers explaining this is perhaps the most succinct and easiest to understand explanation precisely of what happened to SVB. Very good. Brilliant. Coffeezilla is so good.
So now what, right? Doesn't the government guarantee bank deposits? Why are we even talking about this? Well, they kind of do. The FDIC insures up to $250,000 per account. However, at places like Silicon Valley Bank, they had a lot of accounts with a lot more than that. Because as we spoke of, they hosted a lot of venture capital startups that might have had anywhere from $10 to $50 million in there. And suddenly, that company, which was healthy yesterday, now can't get access to that money and can't meet payroll because their bank had failed. And this triggered a huge response from many in Silicon Valley to call for depositors to have their money guaranteed, with people like Jason
God, the worst, dude. This is the fucking worst, dude. I can't, like, even if I agree with, like, depositors getting their, federally protected money, I just can't help but feel so much anger in my fucking heart. 250K is too low. It's insane that a small company would say 2.5 million in payables and payroll at the end of the month should be prudent and split their cash across 10 banks in case of a run. The fees and admin would be crazy, but great for banks.
Have their money.
This take isn't even incorrect. I hate to, I hate to say that I do agree with Mark Cuban. I think that 250K being like FDIC insured at the max cap is correct. The expectation that like insurance is supposed to kick in is yet another additional mediator in this circumstance. In my opinion, I think it's just more money for people to make. But that's not even the whole point. Okay, that's not even the main point here. We're talking about like what the federal government can protect against and shit like that. But
guaranteed.
I do.
With people like
I do fucking despise this guy. I'm so mad. He's the worst, dude. Yeah, free markets over free stuff. You should be absolutely terrified right now. That's the proper reaction to a bank run and contagion. Oh God. Oh, POTUS. Adding the POTUS. Crying. He's doing an emergency pod, dude. Fuck. Jason Calacanis and fucking all of the other shitbirds, dude, that fucking chirp all the goddamn time, nonstop about how they fucking despise the nanny state and how venture capital is saving us, about Silicon Valley is the future. Oh, suck me dry, dude. Suck my cock, you fucking bitch. And of course, a month from now, they're going to go back to the same old bullshit, okay? Wouldn't libertarians want the banks to fail? Yes, they would, because no one's a libertarian. No one. There is no such thing as a libertarian when your bank is failing, okay? There's no such thing as a libertarian when you retire and you want Social Security benefits. Ayn Rand proved that, okay? There are no libertarians at the moment of insolvency, okay? There is no such thing. You know how people say like, oh yeah, well, there's no atheism when push comes to shove and you're staring down the barrel of a gun. It's the same principle, basically. Yeah, everyone want to act libertarian until the banks fail. Yeah, no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. No such thing as a libertarian in a fucking bank run. Okay? No such thing. Didn't Ayn Rand take welfare? Of course she did. Of course she did. My expectation is not the opposite either. Like, what is this? Begging big government, big daddy government to come with its large, juicy, fat cock and just, give him the cummies in the form of a bailout. Ooh, please, big daddy government, please save me. Save me. Please pump your load into my bank, please. Yeah, put out the fire in my loins, Big Daddy Gov. All right, let's continue.
Jason Calacanis saying, you should be absolutely terrified right now. That is the proper reaction to a bank run and contagion. Guarantee all deposits up to $10 million or this will spiral into chaos. And comments like this sparked a huge debate on whether the government should or would get involved. Ultimately, with the answer coming on Sunday when the U.S. Treasury said this, quote, depositors will have access to all of their money. And there you have it. The U.S. government is stepping in to save not only Silicon Valley Bank, but also Signature Bank as well. They did this citing a systemic risk exception, which really boils down to a single idea. Please don't panic, guys. Please don't take out your money. Ultimately, the U.S. government doesn't want you worried about your bank deposits. However, not everyone saw this as a win. Many were quick to point out that once again, the government only seems to step in to help a certain type of person. Quote, Mark Cuban, bail out Silicon Valley Bank tonight. Feds, approved. Goldman Sachs needs $824 billion. Approved. JP Morgan Chase needs $416 billion. Approved. Average Joe, my wife has cancer. Can we get Medicare? We're broke. Now, I do have to tell you that those in favor of the Fed's actions will tell you that this is an unfair characterization, that it's not the super rich getting bailed out. They'll point out that this isn't a traditional bailout at all because it only applies to the depositors and that executives and shareholders will get nothing. And that sounds good, except for the fact that some executives and shareholders in Silicon Valley Bank had already cashed out, with Greg Becker, the CEO, selling $3.6 million worth of his shares right before their collapse. And this gets even worse when you consider that Greg Becker was one of the people who lobbied to deregulate his own bank. According to Heather Landy of Quartz, quote, the ability of these banks to fly under the radar in the U.S. was no accident. Greg Becker, SVB's CEO, lobbied U.S. officials several years ago to raise the asset threshold at which banks would be considered systemically important. So let's get this straight. They faced less regulatory scrutiny because they weren't systemically important, according to...
Interesting that the very same people that, told Big Daddy government, once again, told Big Daddy government that, they were being too mean. They were being too much of a nanny state to all these little mom and pop banks. Please. Now when push comes to shove and that deregulation has caused systemic collapse, all of a sudden they're like, come on, Big Daddy government, please come save me, please. Now, of course, you ask me, there are governments out there that are doing, a better job at dealing with this kind of thing. But yeah, what do I fucking know, right? I mean... Anytime you bail out a fucking bank, it's your bank now, okay? It's our bank. It's the people's bank. Anytime you have to bail out a corporation, it's our corporation now. Thank you. We just nationalized it. There is no other circumstance in which you can just, offer a fucking loan unconditionally and never expect a return on that investment. Doesn't happen in capitalism, but when the government's doing it, that's expected. Not only that, but also in order to fucking pay the government, I would asset strip every fucking executive down to their shoelaces, okay? Your yacht, our yacht, comrade. Your fucking major multi-million-dollar real estate investments, that's ours now. That's actually going to now go towards the people in that area who can have affordable housing. We've just turned them into these beautiful city blocks, public housing. I'm just saying. It's a good idea, I think. All right, let's continue.
To them, but when everything goes wrong, they're systemically risky and must be bailed out. It's a classic case of wanting it both ways. Now, again, this isn't the same as the full bailouts we saw in 2008. And regardless of whether you land on whether there should have been or should not have been a bailout, the idea that systemically risky banks should get special treatment and regular banks, I guess, don't, sends a pretty clear signal If you're rich, you should move your money into banks that are too big to fail. Otherwise, you run a systemic risk of ending up on Jim Cramer, feeling like this.
Her Janet got me yelling. I need you to read this. Okay. Good one. Look what they did to the owner of Evergrande.